Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
What if you could double your energy naturally without caffeine or stimulants in just 3 short months? It's not only possible, you can transform every aspect of your health if you follow the 12-week blueprint we've created for you in the Awesome Health System. The Awesome Health System is a free course where you receive a daily video lesson spanning the most cutting-edge secrets for air, water, exercise, sunshine, optimizers, mindset, and education. It's something most companies would charge hundreds of dollars for, yet you get it for free when you go to bioptimizers.com. To access your course, register to download the PDF report called 3 Phases of Bioptimization, which gets you access to the report and daily access to the first lesson in the 12-week, 84-day Awesome Health course.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, fertility in age, why health matters more, what's missing in standard fertility treatments, and why treating both partners matters. And of course, I just recently had my son about 13 months ago, and my partner is in her early 40s. I don't know if I should reveal that or not, but anyways, we did a lot preemptively in order that we could conceive, worked out. We're shooting for another one, but again, there's a lot of things that you need to understand when it comes to fertility and age and what's missing, where some items that you might have not considered. And the good news is today we have Gabriela Rosa, who is a Harvard-awarded fertility specialist, founder of the Rosa Institute, and author of Fertility Breakthrough, Overcoming Infertility and Recurrent Miscarriage when Other Treatments Have Failed. She pioneered telehealth-based integrative fertility care, making evidence-based solutions accessible worldwide. Her F.E.R.T.I.L.E method, and that is an acronym, F.E.R.T.I.L.E, method has supported more than 204,000 people across 111 countries with published research demonstrating a 78.8% live birth rate among patients in her signature program, even after years of infertility, recurrent miscarriage, and failed treatments. And she joins us today from the snowy, cold city of Boston. Of course, I'm in Venice Beach, so I can say that. And I'm a former East Coast guy, so I can say that with aplomb. But Gabriela, thank you for taking the time today out of your busy schedule to join us on the Awesome Health Podcast.
A pleasure. And the fact that you are in a much warmer place than me makes me very jealous.
Of course, I do know that you do spend part of your time in Sydney, so you can alleviate. And the contradiction is where the real problem is. And growing up I grew up not far from Boston in Canada, in New Brunswick, Canada.
Oh, wow.
It's about 9 hours away from Boston. And so the climate is very similar. Actually, you guys have a little bit better climate than I had, but it's still relatively enough that I can reflect on the pain of winter.
Yes.
Now that I've been a Southern cowboy for a while, I'm like, the folks are flying in from Christmas. I'm not going back, although Christmas on the East Coast is way better than the West Coast. But that being said, weather trumps everything. So thanks for joining us today. Let's talk fertility. I think to set the stage, I think it's really important to understand that, since the 1960s, when we saw a couple of big transformations, a lot of people working in industrialized areas, an explosion in a variety of chemical components that are going on is through, mass manufacturing and all the elements that we've talked about on the podcast before, plus all of these things that can input fertility. And on top of that, with women's options of moving into the workforce and marriages now moving a decade or more ahead of what they were previously, say, or traditional relationships have undergone this massive transformation. Society's gone across this massive transformation. Women are generally getting pregnant less often and much older than they had in generations previously. And that puts both partners at a specific, I would say, biological challenge, that they're not necessarily in their maybe optimal fertility years. They're in some sort of intermediary stage where some of these elements from the outside could be influencing where they're at right now, much more than if they were 16, 17, 18. Like my mom got married when she was 20 and she was considered old, you know, and my mom's like, you know, in her late 70s. So that's not that long ago. So society's changed a lot. Birth rates have plummeted in all industrialized countries. There's fertility clinics blowing up everywhere. But I think a lot of people don't have the full picture, and I'm hoping you can fill in some of those gaps today for our listeners. What got you into the whole fertility conversation and dedicated your life and having such a massive impact on fertility, and what separates you from maybe what people might have heard? That's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So I'm
You've said so many things that I wanted to comment on.
Yeah. So
no,
we can start
absolutely.
with what got you into the whole area.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I've been doing this work now since 2001. That's when I graduated from my first program and I knew that I wanted to work with women and improve the chances of healthier babies, women and men, really. You know, from the very beginning of my career, I've always treated both partners because I really truly believe that fertility is a team sport. You know, an egg is really a single cell. Without the sperm, it can't create an embryo, and certainly without healthy quality eggs and sperm, we don't end up with a quality embryo that can sustain life and, you know, get on to being delivered as a healthy baby. So for me, it was always an idea that kind of got me focused first on this topic, and then of course kept me really interested in it, which was, what if we could optimize the health of both prospective parents before conception so that we could technically have parents who are healthier, better able to manage their emotions, their mental health, their whole life and well-being throughout the process of raising children. And, you know, and this was a hypothesis, an idea, a belief, I don't know, that if we did have better environmental factors, considering, you know, that all of what I just talked about, we could technically and potentially have a better world, you know, healthier babies, healthier families, a better world as a result of that. So that kind of was like the little delusion that got me, you know, when I was a teenager or early adult, thinking about why this would be something that I could see myself having a conversation about for the next 20 years. As it turned out, it's been way longer than that now. But, you know, it's been really interesting from my perspective of being able to look at where are the inflection points on the journey of individuals first, who then become couples, and, you know, where are the places which we can actually be improving health as well as fertility. So that's kind of how it started. And in the very beginning, I worked whilst I was training, whilst I was studying. I used to work for an obstetrician gynecologist. And I think that also was a heavy influence on my idea about where I wanted to focus my attention. Because I remember having a conversation with him one time and saying, I think as I was finishing my program, saying, I think I might want to specialize in pediatrics. And he turned around to me and said, Gabriela, and he was always such a loving, kind, wonderful, you know, mentor and just human and just an amazing clinician. He was an obstetrician gynecologist, as I mentioned. And the patients loved him. So this one day when I said this to him, he turns around to me and he says, Gabriela, that is the worst idea you've ever had. I'm like, whoa, tell me what you really think, you know? And he said, yes, because, you know, your patient, if you do pediatrics, your patient is not your patient. Your patient is the parent of your patient, and your patient can't speak. So that's not a good idea. Actually, you know, you've got a good point there. And so I considered that, and I considered what was it that drove me to be interested in the topic to begin with. And it really was the cute babies, because we used to get like these cutest babies coming into the office. 6 weeks postpartum, like there's still that whole baby smell was just, so delightful and enticing. And so I was like, okay, maybe that is truly not the best idea because, they came in, they were healthy, they were well, everything was fine. Clearly, if you're working with babies who are not healthy, happy, and well, it's a whole different story, right? And so that changed the course of my kind of trajectory in terms of my career. But what did remain was the fact that I was seeing a lot of women coming through every day, and they were talking about period pain and endometriosis and, all sorts of different types of health conditions. And I started my practice within his clinic. And so I was seeing people come to see me as a naturopathic clinician, naturopathic practitioner, who basically wanted to optimize their health. About 10 years later, I was getting referrals. I was starting to see people who were, just trying to get pregnant, who were having difficulty maybe for a few months, and we would put in place the strategies that now form the foundation of my treatment. And they would conceive and take home babies, and that was wonderful. Up until about 10 years later, when I had a lady who was referred to me, who basically told me, look, I was referred to you and I have had 3 failed IVF cycles. I've been trying to get pregnant for 10 years. Can you help me prepare for another cycle? And I was like, I don't know that this is going to be enough. I don't know that this is going to be the thing that you really need. And we had that conversation, and she said to me, listen, I'm going to give up anyway. So I just want to be healthier before I go into another cycle. And I know that you treat both partners, so we really want to do that together. And so I was like, okay, I was kind of appeased, I was feeling like, okay, at least she has the right expectation. Is improving your health is always going to be a great thing. And so I did that, and this woman, for the first time in 10 years, conceived naturally after about 4 months of intervention. And I'm thinking, gosh, that's a great fluke, that's wonderful, but I don't think it's because necessarily of what it is that I was doing. And a few months after her, there was another lady who then comes into my office. Well, actually, she was kind of dragged by her husband. She really didn't want to be there, but she was there nonetheless. And they had been trying as a couple for 19 years. And at this point, I'm thinking, look, I'm emboldened slightly by, 10 years of infertility that has had a baby, whether it was because of this or not, I don't know. But, 19 years seems like a lot. But we started treatment. And again, several months later, they were pregnant for the first time with, her own eggs. And, it was a real surprise to all of us, really, herself primarily, because she's like, when she's telling me that she's not feeling well, she's having all these symptoms, and I'm asking her, so have you done a pregnancy test? Literally, she turns around to me and she says, don't be ridiculous, Gabriela, I'm not pregnant. I'm like, well, you are doing a fertility improvement, program, so maybe you should test. And so anyway, she tested, she was pregnant. It was a very funny conversation that kind of happened after that. But it was those two cases that really got my attention in terms of like, could this be what's actually making these women, these couples, get pregnant after such a long time of not being successful? And that was a question that I decided to go to Harvard to answer, because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to answer this question. I just knew that I had very consistently and systematically and very methodically done what I did for, a long time, personalizing treatment and, all of those things. We had a good, at the time, I think about 7 years worth of very systematically collected data that I needed to learn how to analyze, and so that was my master's thesis for my master's in public health at Harvard. And essentially it turned out that what I was doing wasn't inconsequential after all. The average number of years of infertility of the patients who were in that cohort was 544 patients. The number of years of infertility was on average 4 years, plus or minus almost 3 years. We had almost 50% of couples having experienced previously failed IVF treatments, 51.5% having experienced previous miscarriage. And once it was all said and done, 78.8% of those those patients took home healthy babies, and the majority of them, 47.7%, through natural conception. So at that point, I was like, oh, okay, so this is actually true. It does work. And it was then that I realized that, okay, the world doesn't know this, you know. So, and I need to figure out how I'm going to insert this into standard care and treatment for patients who are struggling, because it's such a better way to go when it comes to, you know, overall optimization of fertility and treatment. And so I then decided to go to Harvard again for my Doctor of Public Health this time, to figure out, okay, how do I understand healthcare systems in such a way that I can pull the levers necessary, or figure out how to, you know, do that in ways that's going to benefit populations rather than just single individual patients at a time. So that was the question that took me there. And certainly what I discovered in the process is that, healthcare is incredibly fragmented and a very problematic system, and this is not just in the US, this is literally globally, to be able to intervene upon. But it's interesting because the biggest changes come from the outside in, and not typically the inside out, you know. And so that's been a really big learning experience, and, you know, it's something that I'm very passionate about, and certainly can see myself having that conversation for the next 50 years. So, you know, let's see how the world changes in that time.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion, and a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
I think it was Buckminster Fuller said that it's, rather than change the system that currently exists, it's better to create one so powerfully better that adaptation
is necessary.
And I think you identified something very clearly, because I have a lot of friends and colleagues that have been inside of the medical industry and outside the medical industry, and they've all identified, like, you know, the challenge with these large institutional operations is there's just so much compartmentalization and so much and then you got state or national governments or provincial governments that are implementing
misaligned interests.
Yeah, and then you got insurance billing, and then all of this stuff is going into the equation, and then there's, you know, regulatory elements and statutory cares, and then time with the doctor and all of that stuff, and then, you know, all of the lobbyist influence and players inside of that, and all that is just really more than the, you know, a person going to their GP or going to their pediatrician, obstetrician, whatever, to kind of find out what's going on. And what I have noticed as well is that the people in my circle of influence, and that's not a small sum of individuals who've gone through this fertility route, have gone in another direction outside of that institutional elements, because the technology or the awareness is much higher and easier to implement. It sounds like that's what you've been doing. So let's get into maybe some of the do's and don'ts. Or let's say we've got a couple, they've been trying to have kids, they're not having kids, they want to have children. What happens to them when they're looking for fertility? What are their options right now inside the system and outside the system?
It's the Wild West, honestly. It's sad because inside the system, they're going to arrive at many roadblocks, and we'll go through and I'll outline them, because I think that understanding that really helps people to circumvent some of these issues. But outside of the system, they also run up against some pretty challenging perils, because it's unregulated. You have, people who have decided that because they've done an IVF cycle, they're now people who can advise other people on having IVF cycles, and the misinformation and disinformation that gets generated as a result of content creators on like literally making content out there that then people view as advice or as scientifically based evidence, or it's crazy. So the whole system is extremely fragmented, and when you are a couple who are trying to get pregnant and you decide that, all right, we've tried for more than 6 cycles, it hasn't quite worked. Some people, depending on age, they're still going to continue trying, because if you're in your 20s and you haven't conceived, you're probably in less of a rush psychologically than you are if you are in your 40s, right?
Correct.
But you see, the people in their 20s, if they haven't conceived within 3 cycles, there's a problem. And sometimes the people in their 40s, if they haven't conceived within 3 cycles, they're rushed without really wanting to identify what's going on or why that's not happening. Could it just be simply a timing issue, that's causing the lack of conception, rather than it being something deeper? But you see, at 20 or between 20 and 30, if you haven't conceived, in the general population, the majority of people conceive without trying. That's why we hear so many stories of people who have had a drunken one-night stand and got pregnant, or who weren't trying, got pregnant. That happens because of people of the reproductive age. Within 2 years of unprotected intercourse, over 96% of them are going to be
Wow.
pregnant. So that essentially means that
That's the
general
population.
That's the standard.
That should be the standard. Yes,
that is the standard. And the majority of people will conceive within 3 conception attempts. So what happens is that literally what's normal is you have sex, you get pregnant, you have a baby, you're done. You're no longer having this conversation. The conversation flips to what is the baby pram that we're going to get? What is the cot? And when that hasn't happened, it means that there are things that we need to understand that we don't yet understand. Right. And so, but most people are not aware of that, because what they're told is that it takes time. It's a numbers game. Everything is normal. Just keep trying. Whenever I hear those sentences, my first question is, how long have you been trying? Because if it's been more than 3 times, well, then we know that we probably need to start looking for areas of optimization.
And
even if it's just to do with timing.
When you're saying 3 times, it's more like 3 cycles.
Pretty much 3 cycles. And, and most people, if they are really, truly healthy and they are managing their cycles and their cycle timing, within 3 attempts is pretty much all you need to be able to have a successful outcome. If you don't, then the question becomes, but why? What could be getting in the way? It might be irregular cycles. It might be just minor factors. Like there are fertility modeling processes that look at the fact of like how long should it take if it hasn't happened within 3 months? What is it that we should be looking at in terms of time to pregnancy if we add obstacles to the equation? So let's say, for example, when we add one minor factor, a minor factor can be anything from morphology issue in sperm to irregular cycle to a PCOS diagnosis to an endometriosis diagnosis. You pick one, right? Whatever it is, that's going to be considered a minor factor. Once you have a minor factor, your odds of pregnancy go from 3 months time to pregnancy to 2 years average time to pregnancy. So that jumps quite significantly. You add a second minor factor to the equation and we go from 2 to 7 years. and you add a third minor factor, and you end up with an average of 40 years time to pregnancy. Nobody has 40 years to get pregnant. Okay.
No.
So no matter how much you think that you have time, nobody has. And minor factors, again, it's not uncommon to find somebody with poor DNA fragmentation in sperm, and or perhaps even a lowered sperm count, or a motility or morphology issue, all in the same man, right? So each one of those is a minor factor. Then you end up with egg quality issues, or again, like I said, it could be that we've got an irregular cycle, or it could be that we have a thyroid dysfunction. It's so common to see thyroid dysfunction untreated in people who are trying to get pregnant. Like, one of the biggest things that we know in terms of TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is that in the average population, the top of the range is around 4 to 5 international units per liter. The reality of it is that there's studies that show that if you have 2.3 and above, you have increased risk of miscarriage. So the number of women that I see who have been trying for years, who have multiple minor factors, including a TSH of 4, that is completely untreated, and being told that, oh, it's all normal, everything is normal, just keep trying, is crazy. Right. And so I look at this from a much finer lens, looking at, I'm not interested in reference ranges for labs, because you see, reference ranges are created from the people who have been to that lab and the averages that is seen. Now, who are the people who go to labs for blood tests? Are they the healthiest population, part of the population? Not typically. They are people who have reason to consider having a needle stuck on their vein, in their arm, in a vein in their arms, because they probably have something else that's going on with them. And so typically people who either they are super, health conscious and very aware, and they want to go and keep on top of their health, but that is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the population. Everybody listening to this podcast, they're probably those people, right? But the people out there are not. And so the average lab is going to be getting the average of the population. So the averages of what's optimal versus what's actually, okay on a lab reference range is not even close to okay. Like, if we look at, just fasting insulin, most labs will consider a fasting insulin of, 12 okay. As top of your range or borderline. A fasting insulin of above 8 from a fertility perspective could signify insulin resistance, right? And so that tells me that, and mind you, most of the time we're testing the wrong things too late, particularly in the general population. When you've got an HbA1c of 5.6, already you have disease, you have insulin resistance going on. Right. And so really, when we're looking at it from that perspective, instead of looking at, okay, what is okay versus what could be better, is a better question when fertility hasn't been straightforward, when couples haven't conceived easily. Because if they were going to conceive without having to intervene, it would have already happened, right? And so that's the thing that most people kind of miss. The other thing that a lot of times people miss is they compare themselves to the wrong person. They basically will compare themselves to their friend, their neighbor, their sister, their brother, whatever, who drink, smoke, do drugs, and have healthy babies, quote unquote, healthy babies. And they go, why is it that I have to make any changes or do anything if there are people shooting up heroin, having healthy babies out there? And to that, it's really simple to kind of really understand the fact that we've all heard of people who have never smoked a day in their life and died of lung cancer, and people who are chain smokers and have never developed cancer at all. The difference here is actually how the person reacts or responds to the exposure. So is it that cigarette smoking is good for you, that one person hasn't developed cancer? Absolutely not. It's just that person's weakness or susceptibility in the system wasn't in their immune system, it was in their cardiovascular system, right? And so then we have to think about, okay, What does that mean for fertility? The same exposure will have differential effects. So even though somebody might drink, smoke, do drugs and still be able to have a baby, doesn't mean that for somebody who is struggling, that is something that they can avoid looking at or ignore. Because if they do, they're going to continue having more of the same. And so, it's almost like there's really interesting studies that look at a diagnosis of infertility and the rate of all-cause mortality 10 years later. And there is a clear link between a diagnosis of infertility and something not being addressed in terms of health that's causing that. And we'll come back to insulin resistance because it's actually a really good example. And an increased risk of diabetes down the track, and therefore of morbidity as a result of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. So, what is really interesting here is this. Let's say that we have a fasting insulin that is above 8 or 10 or 12, whatever it is. Let's say that as a result of that, we kind of get a bit of a sense that, all right, we need to go and test for a 2-hour glucose tolerance test. And we find by looking at insulin at 0 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, that we have at any point within that test a rise above 11, right? Above 10, 11. At any point that is the case, we know that insulin resistance is in the periphery and it's very likely to be affecting that person, okay? And really, we will only see that in an HbA1c much later, when the problem has already kind of really put itself in situ. And so first, you have insulin resistance, which is basically the body not responding to the fact that the rising insulin is essentially the cells are not responding to the insulin. Therefore, the pancreas starts to produce more. Therefore, the cells start to ignore it more. And we then have a situation where we have higher inflammatory response within the system. We have oxidative stress that is going to be causing a problem in terms of egg quality, sperm quality, but then also implantation failure, because the receptors in the endometrium also are going to become desensitized, and it's going to be a problem in terms of implantation. So there we've got a picture or something that's already raising its head. Now, we know that when we have insulin resistance, if it's not treated, if it's ignored, we are going to end up developing prediabetes. Now, it's really clear that from prediabetes to a diabetes diagnosis is a 5 to 10 year period. It's not a matter of if you are going to develop diabetes, it's a matter of when. And so here we have a situation where it's the prime time to intervene, insulin resistance. It hasn't become prediabetes, it hasn't become diabetes, but it's ignored because it's like, oh, it's okay. Those results are okay, right? And then nothing is done. Now, already it's being a problem for achieving a pregnancy and keeping a healthy pregnancy to term. Now we're going to transition into deeper stages of disease where it's going to affect other organs and systems, which then are going to also impact the ability to get pregnant and keep a healthy pregnancy to term. Metabolic disorder and metabolic disease is going to be more of a problem. And then, of course, we end up with a situation that we have a full diagnosis of diabetes and a shortened lifespan as a result. All that could have been prevented if we looked at fertility from a different lens, if we used the signal of infertility for what it should be, which is a call to arms. It's like, what do we need to understand that we don't, and how do we go about optimizing results rather than trying to bypass it with IVF as the next standard piece of the therapy, right? So that's what couples mostly will find, is that they will have inability to conceive. They will go to their GP or their primary doctor. That the next referral is going to be to a specialist to go and discuss IVF, where all of these other potential places where we could have improved, optimized, intervened, and prevented long-term disease and quality of life decline was ignored.
That's a nice deep dive on where the average person is going to end up going into the traditional model and what are those things. So if I heard you correct, thyroid, insulin levels are factors that influence fertility. Was there any other elements that
there are so many.
From your perspective, if you could give us a small bullet point list of things that a person needs to look at if they're trying to get fertility optimized. And that's the whole, our company's called Bioptimizers. We had the same issue years ago, looking at, I came from the bodybuilding and athletic world, and it was like, that was maximization. Mm-hmm. And then if you look at, and I would see that the medical model was built on kind of minimalization, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, what's the average? And I thought, man, I don't want anything to do with average. That's just not going to cut the mustard for me. Average sucks. I want to be. And so we evolved into, well, what is the optimal amount for whatever the outcome that we're looking for? And I think that's what's switching in the world today. You know, a lot of I always say bodybuilders were the original biohackers. And then that a lot of that technology implemented into that. And then, of course, now it was more focused on health and longevity and, health span and these type of things by implementing many of these things. But in and around fertility, and a lot of those things actually contribute to fertility, but there are some unique elements that I think, and the other piece too is I think dealing with both parties and getting both parties on board is a critical element. And I'm going to speak for a lot of dudes, maybe but a lot of guys are just like, I'm good. It's the woman's fault. My sperm is like awesome. They're resistant to actually getting that looked at or taking responsibility. Absolutely. And I've noticed as a general, going back to my days when I was a consultant in the health industry, I always found that for whatever reason, women tend to be more curious about it and more responsive to elements of intervention and what was following a diet program or a training program or taking in some of these other elements. I found them just much more compliant than guys as a general. So getting both of those parties on the same page as a collective unit support, I think, is critical. And then what are these other factors that they need to do and where did they go? Obviously, we're going to refer to you've worked all this stuff out, but just as a flyer here, what are some things that we need to address as a couple?
I think that one of the things that you mentioned that is really important to underline and highlight and put neon lights around is the importance of taking responsibility for one's part of this equation, right? Because one of the big things and one of the big reasons why couples fail through treatment so often is 40% to do with male factor, 40% to do with female factor, and only 20% to do with embryonic and other factors, which means that men have 50% of this responsibility of achieving pregnancy and keeping a healthy pregnancy to term. So when men are resistant or hesitant to actually go and have a semen analysis, my question always is, how much do you really want a baby? Because the reality is that is your ego bigger than your need to actually put action in place that's going to really get you to where you want to be, which is to have a baby. I think that a lot of men are scared and afraid that if they see a negative result, that there is nothing they can do. And what that means about them, their masculinity and, who they are as humans, it somehow means that there is less, attached to that outcome.
I think to be fair to men and to identify something, because I agree with you, but I think to be fair, traditionally, vulnerable men were not necessarily the men that were most attractive as a partner. A lot of times,
absolutely.
Traditional masculinity was like, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm suffering for the cause. I don't even. So psychically, oftentimes, and I know there was an element that I had to rectify in my own brain is that whatever's going on with me, like I always use the Black Knight perspective. I think it was an old I forget those guys, those British comedians. And the Black Knight's getting his arms chopped off and his legs. He's like, I'm fine. It's merely a flesh wound. It's kind of like a parody, I think, on the masculine idea. Like, I'm good. Everything's rolling. I'm fine, even when they might be suffering or not be optimized. It wasn't seen as a typical masculine tribute to be complaining. That's kind of changed and kind of went the other way. A lot of women are complaining to me about it, actually. So, and women tend to be much more sensitive around negative emotion. It has a bigger influence on, hey, this is an alarm. And of course, that's relative to, I noticed this with my wife, with my child. I'm like, she's hypersensitive to every little thing. And I'm like, yeah, I fell down. He's going to be good. Shake it off, buddy. And she's like, oh, like I can see there's a significant emotional variability because you do need that sensitivity as a female, particularly around infants and children and these things. I think there's a natural biological sensitivity. And then the difference in cycles is the difference in cycles as well. But again, at the end of the day, you have to look at it as a couple. And you know what? Put your big pants aside and say, hey, listen, like I need to prove that I'm okay. As opposed to saying I'm okay.
Exactly. It's not enough, like what you say is not enough, right?
No,
it's what does the evidence suggest? Are we pregnant?
Correct.
Do we have a baby? That's the only thing that's enough.
Correct.
And so,
and are you doing everything
right.
on your part that you could do to optimize? That's the other, and that's the key element we're talking about is here's 100%. The things that you've got to do if you want to be the person you're bragging about.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the other point here too, is that, there is a part of this that is nothing to do with men, that is more to do with this, lack of structure and misaligned interests in the healthcare system. Because what happens is that predominantly when you go and have the fertility conversation with just a general doctor, the focus very much is on the female. Right. Even when men come into appointments, they're usually told, oh, no, there's nothing you can do. After they ask, what else can I do?
Correct.
So the thing about it is that it isn't a individual's fault that they don't know. What happens is that to continue to choose not to educate yourself further is the problem. You see, so it's like, it's not that the information isn't available, it's that it's sometimes comforting to remain ignorant about it.
Yes.
Because then I don't have to face whatever it is that I may need to face, including the need to action and act because there might be something that I need to, change or do differently. So I think that there are many parts of this conversation. It's not just one thing. But if we look at, the question that you asked, what is it that people can do? And I think that that's a really important question, because a lot of times people don't even realize that they have more influence and more power over their biology than they are given an initial credit for. And so, of course, our environmental exposures, and by environment, I mean everything that you put on your skin, that you eat, and that you are surrounded by in the air you breathe, in whatever it is that you're doing in your day-to-day, is going to have some kind of impact on your body and your fertility. When it comes to fertility outcomes, there is no such thing as a neutral effect of an exposure. There is always going to be either a positive effect or a negative effect. Why? Because any neutral effect, when things haven't been easy or straightforward, translate immediately into a negative effect. Mm-hmm. Because even if you don't have to be dealing with it, because it's not really that important, the fact that it's there, you have to sort through that, right? And so basically, this is how I encourage people to look at it. It's almost like you have to look at yourself, whoever you are, man, woman, whatever. You have to look at yourself as already carrying within you 50% of that little baby you want to create.
Yeah.
So if you were pregnant right now, right, and men have to indulge me on this one. So just imagine being pregnant, right? Don't worry about how the baby's going to come out. Just be pregnant. And if you're pregnant right now and you want to give your baby the best possible start in life, what are the things that you absolutely need to start doing and stop doing to give yourself the best possible chance of the healthiest possible baby and your baby the best possible start in life? Those are the things, I call it act pregnant now to get pregnant later. Because those are the things.
It's a beautiful framing of the idea. It's like, okay, the day of conception, really, like the day of conception, the man's 50% is now done. But prior to that, that's where he has the option to optimize these things. And I think a lot of men don't take full ownership and understanding. And if it was presented to them that way, it would get much more impact. It's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't drink those beers, or maybe I shouldn't, be hanging out at the chemical plant on the weekend,
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. And so that's essentially how people need to think, because we already know, like if I was to ask anybody, like even, the most uneducated, what are some things that you could do that make you feel better? And what are some things that you could do that make you feel worse? Right? You can ask a child that. Like if I ask my children, like honestly, if you ask my kids, what is a healthy diet? They will tell you. They already have that notion and concept, right? And so basically it's about looking at what is it that you can start doing and stop doing that if you were to start doing and stop doing right now would be contributing to the health of your baby that you are just stating right now. Because you are producing sperm, men are producing sperm continuously throughout life. Women, we are born with all the eggs that we will ever be born with, that we will ever have, right? And so basically what that means is that maturation process of the egg is going to be dependent on the exposures around the fluids around the egg. And those fluids are going to depend upon where we sit in relationship to our environment. So what happens outside is going to contribute to what goes on inside, and what goes on inside will determine the outcome of the entire conversation, whether we get pregnant, whether we have a baby, and whether that baby is healthy. Most people, and you can ask any woman this question, like, what is the very first thing, when you saw the positive pregnancy test, what is the very next thought you had? Like, honestly, you can ask 100 women this question and you will have a very similar answer. Is my baby going to be healthy? Mm-hmm. That is the very next question that a woman will ask herself literally upon seeing a positive pregnancy test. And so that question can only be answered through action before a conception is even in place.
Right. And so that's an internalized feminine-centric kind of idea, but the guy has got to recognize, hey, we need to get ahead of this curve right now so that she has the confidence, number one, that you're doing your part, I think. And that can be a very bonding experience, I think, if both partners are actively contributing to the process, actively saying, I'm doing it, we're holding each other accountable.
Exactly. Or a very distancing experience.
Correct.
I see that the couples who have the hardest time post-birth are, because of resentments that built in that entire process, are the ones where the guy wasn't involved, where he didn't take ownership, where he didn't take responsibility. Because what ends up happening is that continues in one way or another throughout the pregnancy, throughout the child rearing years. And so women become very resentful about the fact that their partner is not stepping up. Right. And so that creates a lot of additional stress on the couple's relationship, which already, by the way, after birth is going to be strained no matter what. Even if everything goes perfectly, there's going to be a amount of sleep deprivation that already in research shows, it's really interesting, that sleep deprivation makes partners, even the slightest kind of reactions are most likely going to be taken negatively rather than neutrally when somebody's sleep deprived, right? And so relationship satisfaction, there was some research that I saw the other day. I was doing a literature review. I do a lot of patient education on my Instagram account. Gabriela Rosa Fertility is the handle. And I did a mini literature review on this topic of like, are you in the wrong relationship to have a baby? Because what happens is that sometimes people, they romanticize the idea of having a baby, but when it comes to practical terms and what it actually means when you have one, people are not prepared for the fact that even if everything goes perfectly well through conception and birth and having a baby, 67% of couples report worse relationship satisfaction after birth, even when things go fine. even when things go well, because it is a stressful situation.
Sure. Yeah.
So what happens is that, that effect is sustained for about 3 years after the birth of a child. 3 years.
Wow.
So imagine, if you don't have a good platform and base and foundation to begin with, what you're likely to encounter down the track.
That's so valuable of an insight, is that responsibility, and then looking at, that's deviations, and have you built up enough awareness and actions around that awareness to also withstand post-baby birth. It's not insignificant. And I know when my wife and I decided to engage in this process, and I'm in my 50s and she was in her 40s, and we went through it, and we did all the health testing, and we tested everything else, and we went forward with everything. We were very clear about the birth process. We were very clear about the financial responsibilities, the time allocations, and, right after birth, just to validate what you were saying, is she's in a PhD program. She's, there's so much dependency on the mom when the child is born. I was very clear that was a lot to deal with as a person. And so we made it clear that she wasn't handling the income producing activities, and I was going to handle that, and she was going to create the environment and that stuff. So that was great on that side of the equation. So she had enough resources to still do her school while raising our child. Now, what came up unexpectedly is when we both started doing some of the shared stuff with the baby at nighttime, I couldn't function in my job. I came down, we did it a few nights with my son, and I was like, I like to operate it, like I always say, fifth gear. I got to be operating at fifth gear here. And I'm coming down here and I'm in second gear, and I can't get out. I'm just like burning the end. I'm like, oh. So two things happened out of that. One, I was really clear about the performance declination that she was experiencing. Maybe not to the full extent, but I got enough of a taste of it. I was like, whoa, this is heavy duty. I can't function this way. And so we made a agreement that she was going to sleep with the baby in the other room so that I could be fully rested and support the enterprise. And we made that commitment shortly afterwards, because it was like, I can't do it. And then further on, we had to get some assistance for her so she could do her studies. And there was a lot of resistance and worried about that. That took over a year to work out. Just so that she felt comfortable having the right person with our child when she was, just in wanting self-care even. I mean, right? And then you go through all these other elements prior to. But I want to, so just sharing that with our audience, because I'm not ignorant to some of those nuances, and I just want to validate what you're saying experientially. It's really cool. But let's go back maybe to the, because I want to be mindful of the time. What are the things that people need to be aware of in this pre-pregnancy practice? And I think the guy side would be great if you could reveal some of that, because nobody talks about this. So I'm really glad that you're entering in that, because I'm really motivated on that.
Yeah, this is the thing though, is it's not different. It's not different for women than to men. If we were to make this really simple and really just, focus on what are the basics of this whole conversation, is 80% is going to be the healthy foundations that anybody would have to optimize their health. Diet, sleep, exercise, the things that are obvious and clear, right? That everybody would know. You put those I call them the big rocks. You put those big rocks in place, you are going to then be able to add the sand and the gravel and the water, and you're going to fit a whole lot more in that jar, right? But if you don't put the big rocks first, what's going to happen is that you fill it up with water, you're not going to get the same amount of ability of holding capacity for that same container. So if we look at what are the very basic things, look at what happened to sleep, right? And what's interesting, research shows that when a man doesn't get 6 hours of sleep for a period of just 1 week, his testosterone level drops for essentially the same amount that as if he was 10 years older.
Yeah. And,
so ultimately,
the data is saying that right now, testosterone levels of men overall
already
are the average 20-year-old is at what a 70-year-old was in the 1970s, which is and you know,
crazy.
Based on my experience, I remember I grew up in the 70s, and I remember older gentlemen at that time. They definitely had more testosterone. What I see with younger, like the aggressiveness, or you know, things, or physicality. What's the problem here? Why is that so downtreading from your perspective of fertility?
Look, our environment has definitely changed. Endocrine disruptors and estrogenic components in the environment, from plastics, microplastics, you know, chemicals, all of those factors are decreasing testosterone levels in men, you know, and of course impacting women as well in terms of hormones. So our environment, the choices that we make in our day-to-day, the things we put on our skin, the things that we ingest, the things we put on our body, the air we breathe, all of those things is going to have some impact. So understanding what are the things in big categories that make a difference, you know, forever chemicals, so cleaning products, Teflon, you know, plastics, all of those types of things. Those are big category items that ultimately are going to be making a big difference to how our hormonal system operates. And therefore, it's going to have an impact on fertility as well. So, you know, but if we just go back to basics and we start to look at what is it that makes the biggest difference for the way in which the body operates, it's going to be those very basic foundational things. Then the big piece that also needs to be taken into account is proper diagnosis, and then interpretation of results being done properly, which we've talked about already. So, you know, those two things combined make the biggest difference in how things are actually moving forward, because without understanding what is getting in the way. I had a patient once, a couple who came to me, they were infertile for 14 years. In that time, they had 6 failed IUI cycles, 2 failed IVF cycles, and no baby. And they did have 1 natural conception and a miscarriage. And, you know, when we started to do all of the workup for them, we found that they had an infection that essentially hadn't been picked up, and that was known to cause implantation failure and miscarriage. So that was just because it wasn't tested. Right? Not because it's obscure in any way. It's because it wasn't looked at. And so the second that we identified it, we treated with antibiotics. We addressed everything else in terms of their health. We got sperm parameters to improve substantially from 2 million to over 20-something million. And we were able to have a natural conception. So, you know, in fact, the actual sperm parameter was 2 million to 36 million, now that I recall it correctly. And so the reality of it is that there are so many different things that you can identify if you look for them. Most patients, of course, won't know to look for them. And because the healthcare system is so fragmented, you're not necessarily going to find within the healthcare system the help and support that you need to really look and dive deep into the details, the nuance, the personalized components that essentially can transform results. So that's where the vast majority of people will benefit from, like, just showing up to a doctor's office and say, hey, listen, what else can you test? What else can we do? And what else can we understand here that we don't? And failing that, looking for more answers, you know, looking for understanding of, like, don't settle for a unexplained diagnoses. That's the one thing that, if there is one takeaway from this entire conversation, is that if you hear at any point in your journey everything is normal, just keep trying, go find another practitioner, go find another clinician, go find someone who actually is willing to look at the things that are going to make a difference.
Well, I'm going to make another suggestion, because I think where this is going to hit the sweet spot for a lot of people is who are motivated, they want to, you know, put their best foot forward. And we can probably get past this a little bit faster if we're able to leverage what you have dedicated your life to.
I mean,
so how about this? How about we talk about you and your mission and the education and information and mission that you're on, so that you can say, hey, look, rather than hope that you get the right thing through this thing, why don't we just talk to Gabriela and her team and get all the information there to get ahead of the curve? And then when you walk into your local GP's office or pediatrician or obstetrician or naturopath or whoever you're going for your baby advice, that you are armed to the teeth of what you want, what you need to do, how you're going to go about it, what's going on. So let's go right there. So please, unfiltered, unregulated, unmitigated, I want to hear about the things that you say. Listen, let's imagine we've got a couple. They're in their 40s. Time's running out. They've tried everything. It's not working. They've gotten probably poor advice. They don't know what to do. They're really motivated. They're on board. They're connected. They're saying, let's do this thing.
Yeah.
They go, hey, Gabriela, what do I do? Where do I go? Where do I start?
They need to go to my website, fertilitybreakthrough.com. They need to make an appointment to go and have a conversation with one of my team to figure out, okay, what is going to be the best next step for you? I'm very, very, very passionate about education, and because of that reason, Fertility Breakthrough, the book, is actually available free on Spotify and YouTube.
Wow.
So literally it's my entire book that's sold on Amazon and everywhere else, where people can listen to it and understand more about the things that they can put in place. That's one avenue. The second avenue is I run a program that I have been running now for the last 15 years or more, since 2011, called the Fertility Challenge. It's a 14-day program. It's fully evidence-based. It literally steps people through all of the things that they need to understand to optimize their chances of taking home a healthy baby. And from there, once people understand, if they feel like working with us further is the best next step for them, we provide an assessment so that we can actually understand in advance, is this a case that we can help? Because if it isn't, I'd rather recommend that they do something else that's going to help them than they take up the space of somebody else who actually we can best serve. So we assess the cases before we take on couples to make sure that it's the right fit for all concerned. And that would be the perfect next step for many people.
And the website again and your social media
is Fertility Breakthrough. Yeah, so fertilitybreakthrough.com, and the social media handle they can go to is Gabriela Rosa Fertility. Gabriela with one L, so Gabriela Rosa Fertility on Instagram.
This is exciting. I'm really passionate about this topic, and I feel very blessed and fortunate that prior to making the decision to get pregnant with my wife, that we did a lot of these elements ourselves, and we didn't have any challenges having a baby, even at an advanced age, which was really exciting. And I know literally dozens and dozens of people who have gone down the same avenue, many who had many of the challenges, and all of a sudden it was remarkably corrected in a very short period of time. And then to the other people out there who may be thinking about having a baby at some point, and they might be, getting a little older or haven't had their partner or whatever, you know what? Get ahead of it right now and start putting putting the intention on it right now, so that when that opportunity does present itself, you've done your share of the equation. And for all you dudes out there, all right, I'm going to issue a challenge, and that is, be the person you're bragging about. It's kind of like in sports. Everybody can talk tough, but once you get out on the field, then you got to back
show
up the
what you've made
talk.
of.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Getting pregnant is not it's not a verbal game. It's you got to take it out onto the field. And if you are as good as you say you are, you should be excited about demonstrating that on the field of play and taking that responsibility. You're 50% of the equation, guys. And for ladies who might be listening to this, issue that challenge to your man. Hey, I believe in you. Why don't you prove it on the field? If you're as good as you say, hey, prove me wrong. Prove yourself here. I'm excited about that. And I think then it can be kind of a fun and exciting element. Having a child is a really exciting and lovely experience. I Highly recommend it. We have a baby crisis in the world, especially in industrialized nations. We need more babies. We need more people conscientiously approaching it with the environmental conditions. And Gabriela, you are a breath of fresh air. I'm so delighted that you've taken the time to be on here and provide the services that you do and the book and all that. We're going to put all the show links, show notes in the links so you can access those website easily. But for everyone else, take action on this. It's worth it. It reduces anxiety about, and it reduces anxiety after, because you want to have a healthy baby and you want to be able to do, it's always a dice roll with children. You never know what's going to happen. But you want to make sure that you're not operating from a position of, I wish I could have, as opposed of, I did everything I could and I can move forward.
Absolutely.
In the future. And
100%.
It gives you a lot of confidence. So thanks,
Absolutely.
Gabriela, for joining us. Thank you for our listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you for our listeners. This is F.E.R.T.I.L.E from Bioptimizers at the Awesome Health Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and go out there and make some babies. We're excited to hear your results.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip, rapid cheat meal relief. Research shows that cheat meals can actually be an effective way to boost your metabolism. One key weight loss hormone, leptin, can be increased by up to 30% following a cheat meal. The challenge with the cheat meals is that all those extra calories and lower food quality can be hard to digest, which means you could be totally sidelined with a food coma after big cheat meals. The solution is to take strong digestive enzymes like masszymes, which will help rapidly digest and break down the extra food. 3 to 5 capsules before or right after your cheat meal can make a huge difference in how you feel following the cheat meal. If it's a cheat day with multiple large meals, you might want to go up to 10 capsules or higher to help you power through all that food. To save 10% on masszymes, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and enter the code CHEAT10 at checkout.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.